Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Utah Film Pod. My name is Josh Terry. I'm here with Dani Hatch and with Mark LaRocco. And we're finally going to follow through on a promise, aren't we, guys?
That's right. We're doing it, finally.
We've got some really fun stuff we've been excited to talk about for a while. We do have some other stuff to talk about first. But before we even get to the formal stuff, how about the informal? How you guys doing?
Doing well.
Good. It's I guess we're officially kind of into the summer now. Like it feels like. I know that summer. Don't they say? Is it like June 21st is the official? Like when I don't know if it's an equinox or whatever the thing is, but
yeah, we had this.
I always discussion. Did we say this last time?
No, in our house it's like because the kids get out of school for summer at the end of May, beginning of June.
Yeah, which is earlier than normal.
It's about normal, I think, but you're right. Summer doesn't officially start till June 21st. So
yeah,
but by then it feels like halfway through summer.
I know,
right?
I know.
Which is why I've never thought of that as the real start of summer.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And so. Well, and it's all been a kind of a fog for me because normally like my transition from spring semester into summer, if I'm teaching, feels muddled anyway. But this year, being sick as well, I just kind of like had this quarantine fog of kind of a brain fog that I finally feel like I'm emerging from. And now I'm just here and I'm ready to embrace summer. And we were already, I'm going to go see Top Gun again. I haven't scheduled it, but I'm definitely going to go see it again.
Oh, you gotta.
Got some of this other fun stuff to do. But in the meantime, there is a little bit of news, right? I mean, Dani, what you mentioned that you had some breaking news.
Well, I actually do have
just
breaking
hot off
news
the
now.
press.
Yeah, no, this is so funny because first thing I saw this morning actually was that the Utah Film Commission posted that Con Air premiered on this day, which, when we're recording, this is June 6th, 25 years ago. And
Wow.
It was so fun, because what they posted was one of those collages, of course, where like people will hold up a picture from the movie and right in front of the backdrop, the actual Utah backdrop. And that one was really fun. Like, they were showing some stunts or, just Nick Cage with his flowing locks. And yeah, I thought, all things considered, like with his new movie out and our whole episode dedicated to him, what was that, 2-3 episodes ago or something? So important stuff.
So now, what part of Con Air did they film here? Because I don't remember them were they on the Salt Flats at any point?
I haven't seen Con Air still.
Or is it more just kind of the big wide open desert?
It was a lot of like
Mark,
big wide open desert.
Yeah.
I don't remember where they filmed that, but it's interesting that they chose June 6th, because that's also D-Day. June 6th, 1944. That's what it's more famous for. So maybe the Con Air producers did that on purpose. Probably
I'm sure
not,
they did,
though.
Mark.
It's
I'm sure that
movie.
was the first thing on their mind was, we have this big blockbuster starring Nicolas Cage, and it's about Nick Cage on a convict-filled airplane in the desert. Nothing else speaks to D-Day than this.
It would have made more sense for the Saving Private Ryan producers to do that, right?
I wonder if
just
they
a
did.
bit.
Did they?
Just a bit.
Did they? Oh, let's see.
I can't remember when Saving Private Ryan came out. I mean, I remember it was like 1998, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in '98. I don't know what when it opened, but yeah. Oh, it was July 24th. Okay. But yeah,
that is interesting. Okay, so the Utah Film Commission is celebrating Con Air, which
on D-Day.
Good for them.
Yeah. Well, and then something else that's been going around is just that Sundance Institute is hosting Best of Sundance Film Festival screenings this summer, June through July, in Salt Lake and some of the counties. So in case you missed those will be available if you check out their website, social media pages. You can reserve seats for that. So it does seem, and they're saying we're doing it again. So I think it's just, kind of, they're taking what worked out last year from having to do everything virtual. And
right.
I think they did like outdoor showings, was it last year? And that's kind of what it looks like they're doing here too, just to be safe with COVID. But
so now are they, when you say best of, is it just the best of like the films from this year, or is it past Sundance festivals?
I believe it's this year.
Okay. No, that's good to know, because I mean, I could definitely see how people would like to go see some of the kind of the best of Sundance from the last 20, 30 years, you know.
Maybe. That's a great question. I just assumed on that. That could be the case.
Yeah.
But...
Well, if we gave them an idea, they can thank us later.
Pay us for
This
it.
year.
So I want to circle back on that Con Air thing. Is that all right?
Please.
Okay.
You know,
So
can we ever get enough Con Air, really?
So I have. I'm not going to call it breaking news because it's an article from June 8th, 1997. But Jeff Bice reported that the producers of Con Air chose the Salt Lake City and Ogden airports and a deserted airstrip in Wendover that
okay.
filming took place in, and it's noted in the
that
Con
makes
Air
sense.
production notes. And so
Cool.
the Salt Lake International Airport tarmac filled in for the Oakland, California airport, and they temporarily housed a fictional U.S. Marshal's office. So,
Okay.
yeah, it was the airports basically that were used in Utah.
Which was at least the second time that the Salt Lake Airport was used in a major film, because as I recall, wasn't Dumb and Dumber part of that
goodness.
also
I
filmed
think
there?
It was. Yeah.
I didn't know about the airport. That's one of the
fun,
funniest
yeah.
scenes too. Falling off the jetway.
Dumb and Dumber. That was, I guess that technically was a movie.
I think if I recall a few months ago when I told you that was one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. I think you almost disowned me as a friend.
Almost. I'm not that merciless. Well, that's definitely some good news, some useful news. Now I think we've also been kind of excited about. So we don't really have any movie reviews this week, although we are kind of in the midst. There's some big stuff coming soon, but we recently mentioned that there are some streaming series that we're both kind of, or that we're all three are all kind of excited about, and so one of them I think is still in the process of releasing episodes, so we're going to kick that down the road a little bit.
And kick it I
also
shall, but that's okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I kind of want to wait and see if it gets better before I review it, right? That's kind of one of, yeah. But Stranger Things, at least volume 1, right? Because there's the first 7 episodes, and then 2 more episodes are coming out at the beginning of July.
Yep.
But the first 7 are out. We're not, of course, we're not going to give away everything that's happened in all 7. But I think that given the timeliness of it and given our subject matter to come, it might be nice to take a few minutes and talk about Stranger Things. So Mark, you haven't watched all 7 episodes, right?
I have not. I've only watched the first one.
Okay, so why don't you kick us off? Let's start with you, so that you can kind of lead in and give us a sense of like where you're at.
Okay.
And that maybe that can kind of help, because like I said, the tough thing with these streaming series is that you want to talk about things over the course of the series, but you also don't want to give away too much, especially because like episodes end on cliffhangers to lead into other episodes, and so
Right.
it's kind of a tricky thing to review.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the episodes, and for people who watched it so far already know, they're very long. So when I saw that the first episode was an hour and 18 minutes, I just assumed that was they were just going to do an extra long season opener for some reason. And then when you guys told me, no, that's pretty much how all of them are, that's one reason I haven't been able to get to the other ones yet. But it really does start where the characters have been separated kind of for the first time in the series, at least living in different states and possibly different countries, as we now know that one of the major characters is in Russia. And then, you get this narration, and I like this because I think maybe this will lead into what we're talking about a little bit later, but they play California Dreamin' while Eleven is narrating her letter that kind of describes how her life is going in California.
And she's moved, I mean, just for clarification, so she is, at the end of the last series, she and the Byers family, right? You got Will and Jonathan and oh my gosh, I forgot Winona Ryder's character's name, Joyce.
Joyce, yeah.
So they have taken 11 under their wing, and the 4 of them have moved out to California, and everybody else is still back in Hawkins. Right? Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah. And so then, we learn that there's, for the most part, the characters aren't, I mean, they're growing up, so it's kind of a coming of age. Let me back up. The Harry Potter series, it starts out very kind of innocent, and there's a lot of childlike wonder, and it's just this magical world that Harry's being introduced to, and he's basically just a little kid. I mean, he and Hermione and Ron, and as we watch them grow up, each movie, in a way, kind of grows up. It's not just the kids that are growing up, it's the movies that are growing up, and they're getting darker, more thematically serious, and a little bit more violent. There's a lot more stakes, and it's kind of bigger things that are happening compared to like the openers. And I kind of feel like Stranger Things, and I've only seen the first episode, so you guys may correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be getting a little darker, a little more violent, a little gorier, and the characters are really going through a lot of not just trauma with all the supernatural elements going on, but just becoming older teenagers and struggles there. Like, for example, the relationship between Max and I can't remember his name, but her former boyfriend.
Lucas.
Team.
Lucas.
He's on the team now. They, she's can't be honest with this, the officials at her school, and
she has fully embraced her teenage angst.
Right. She appears to have done that. Yes.
Whereas Lucas is now, like you say, he's kind of like bursting into the fringes of popularity. He's on the basketball team. He's he's definitely growing up. He's kind of on the good side of puberty. And this is
been favorable to him.
Yeah. 11 doesn't have her powers, right? That's like kind of the key thing, is that she starts off this series and she does not have her powers, which is causing problems in her California school because she's getting bullied, because she's still, I mean, she's obviously like come a long ways from where she was when she was at the lab, but she's still kind of like struggles kind of with her speech and things, and so she's having a real tough time, and she wants to lash out against these kind of like these mean girls, but can't, and then back in Hawkins there's kind of similar tensions where the whole community seems to be trying to recover from this this shared trauma that they've all been going through over these last few years, right? Because it's not just the kids, it's like the whole town has been kind of reeling from this. It's a small enough community.
Yeah, and then you have the AD&D kids, or the D&D, I don't know. And this is kind of funny.
AD&D?
Because I used to play AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I'll admit. I was an AD&D kid. I had all the dice, 20-sided, 30-sided, 100-sided.
See, I thought you were referring to ADD, not AD&D.
Yeah,
they may have AD&D. They may have that too.
Accurate.
I don't know. But they definitely have AD&D. Do they? I can't remember. In the series, do they just call it D&D or Dungeons and Dragons?
I can't.
I think it's just regular Dungeons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was.
I'm gonna say something here that I'm sure is gonna shoot me in the foot with at least some portion of the audience, but for all of the effort that Stranger Things and episodes of shows like Community, and there was some other one, because it seems like there's really been a lot of effort to kind of feature Dungeons and Dragons in kind of our contemporary pop culture, and as much as it's been featured, still have zero interest. Like no role-playing game interest whatsoever. I still just kind of look at it and just think, I just don't get this.
I'll have to invite you to one of our sessions then.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
Is that what Mythic Quest is about? There's a TV show on, I think it might be on Apple TV, that it may just be something that sort of makes fun of that, but anyway.
Sorry, Mark, I keep cutting you off.
No, it's okay. Anyway, I don't know, like, I'm not just going to keep, like, trying to give away the plot, but it picks up where the other left off, and I guess it's near the end of the school year. I think it's in March or so of
it's spring break,
1986.
yeah.
Oh, spring break,
it's spring break, right.
But yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot more to kind of say about it because I do want to keep watching the other episodes. But let's hear your take on it.
What stood out to me about the first episode had to have been just the worst possible timing for an opening scene I can remember ever. Because there's a flashback to, I think it was 1979 is when it's supposed to be, like 4 years before the Stranger Things, official kind of timeline started, and 11 is involved in this mass murder in the lab with involving all the other kids and a lot of the aides and the people working there. And of course, it's set up kind of in this ambiguous way, so we don't know exactly what's happened. And that's kind of what a lot of the series is going to be about, is determining what exactly caused this. But my gosh, I mean, going through that opening scene less than a week after this very, heinous tragedy. And they run, to their credit, they ran a warning at the beginning of it. But, geez, I mean, I can't imagine what they were thinking as far as, now we've got to run this right now. Are you serious? Like, because people have been waiting for this series to come back for years. I mean, has it been like 3 years since the last Stranger Things? But
I bet, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
feels like it. And you're referring to the Uvalde, Texas shooting,
yes,
right?
Yeah. So I don't know, Danny, did that jump out to you as defining a way as it did to me, or?
I don't know. I think I was just kind of cautious anyways approaching this season because I really, really like this show. And I think as I was watching it, I was able to remember how much I love this show, right? And I remember I had a remote in my hand, like, for most of the time we were watching, where it's like, because I just get so queasy with, like, gross stuff and everything. Like, we talked about this before with Doctor Strange. I'm not into horror or anything like that, right? Yeah. And so, I don't know. I think I was kind of, like, shielding anyways from a lot of that stuff. But I don't know. I think it's done in a very, like, it's obviously supernatural things going on. And I wonder if that maybe helps. But it is still pretty graphic. And so... But, that's the point, is, like, this, like, and that's why, tragedies like school shootings and everything are just so awful, because, like, it's one of the worst things that can ever happen, is just, like, mass slaughter of children, right? Mm-hmm. And so, like, I think, that's why they use this in the show, because this was a very horrible, tragic event that happened, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it's sad when, we see things like that mirroring in reality, because it is just an awful thing. But that's why we kind of have those reactions to it, is because it's so awful. So.
Yeah. Well, and it ties in as well with what, I think, Mark, what you were referring to, and that the show is the show has always been creepy, scary, pretty violent, it's always been at least at the PG-13 level, right?
Yeah. And I'd say it still kind of is PG-13.
And it is, right.
Yeah.
But even within that spectrum, it is getting progressively more dark, more violent, more adult, as the kids are getting more adult, and so I do have to admit that, and again, without giving anything away specifically, the first couple episodes, I was a little bit, okay, well, I'm really glad to have Stranger Things episodes to watch, and I'm glad that they're giving me so much material, right, because these episodes are so long. But it took me a couple episodes to really kind of embrace this season, and I am happy to report, and I'm sure, Mark, this will be good news for you, that it gets better as it goes along.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that it started badly. In fact, I wouldn't even really say it wasn't like the gory factor that made me as apprehensive at the beginning, so much as something else I'm going to mention here in a second. But overall, by the time you get to the end of this Volume 1 series, it feels like it's fun Stranger Things that we've always kind of known and loved. The one thing that I think is going to become a struggle, and I should have looked this up beforehand, because I think there's actually been an article about this. There might be a little bit of controversy. But one of the things that I thought was really kind of frustrating about the first couple of episodes is that there are so many characters. And I mean, there were a lot of characters by the end of the last season, and this first episode introduces what, like a half a dozen additional fairly significant characters, and you're just kind of, okay, well, this is why these episodes are so long, is because they have to tie together all these threads.
That's probably it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not as many of the characters are together. So there's 3 different subplots, or 4 different subplots going on, and so each one is 20 minutes. That's, almost an hour and a half. So I agree.
Right, and again, I'm happy to say that by the end of the series, this part 1, whatever we want to call it, it didn't feel quite as laborious, but it is an issue that I think is going to be something to deal with as the show, because they've been consistently adding a couple of, like Max, was, I think that was beginning of season 2, and she's great, like she's awesome.
Her storyline is probably my favorite in this season.
Yeah,
I really liked following her.
One other thing I wanted to mention, back in Hawkins, because we talked about the California storyline, but back in Hawkins, the new threat is that these troubled kids, including Max, are being targeted by like this new demon, right? And it seems to be zeroing in on kids who are having specific issues and trauma and PTSD type of stuff. And like I remember watching the new version of it a few years ago and thinking, oh, this just kind of feels like an R-rated Stranger Things in a lot of ways, right? But then this new season of Stranger Things almost feels like a reflection back, because now the characters, and this is where some of these new characters are being introduced, are some of these kids that have like these really traumatic pasts. And I mean, isn't that kind of the whole, because I'm no Stephen King authority, but like as I recall, it is basically like the Pennywise targets the kids for their traumatic vulnerabilities, right? And so it's there's a close kinship here, and probably intentional, I would think, but for the sake of moving on, maybe we can kind of focus in on her a little bit, because I think she really is one of the not just one of the best parts of this season, but really kind of
a central
something
part.
that's featured. It really is.
Yeah. I really liked this season though, like a lot, because I think, and this is just really smart on the showrunner's part, where I think they really paid attention to what worked well in the previous seasons and really focused in on those kind of elements, and then maybe a little less in some other areas. So when it comes to all the different characters, like it didn't feel laborious at all, because like I really enjoyed all of these characters and how they're used. I like some more than others, for sure, and there are some that were kind of put off to the wayside that were favorites in other seasons. But if you look at like the central core storylines, like it's most of the favorite charismatic characters, right? So you enjoy watching them a lot. And something that I thought was super impressive was all the transitions. Like those transitions, oh my goodness, that made my little editor heart just so happy. Because some of them were just perfectly seamless, but it's like, oh wait, I'm in another country now. Like how did that, your brain's kind of catching up, and it's incredible. Shots were fabulous. Like it's just very, very well done. So like, I mean, I think those things would be concerns in other shows, but I think, and yes, having an extra long runtime helps. But I think they were very smart in how they crafted it. So, if I'm someone who's on the fence of like, should I, commit the time to it? I think it's worth the time. It's kind of like a Brandon Sanderson novel, where it's like they're throwing out all these little hints, but at the very end, there are these big twists that like totally make sense, and it's so well crafted. So I enjoyed it a lot. Max especially though. So yeah, I'm circling back to that.
Right.
And maybe it's just because of where I am myself right now in life, but just
do you feel like an angsty 15-year-old teenager?
always I'm just like storming through the halls glaring at everybody at school, but no, I think it's just something that was very interesting in this story was kind of the themes of like everyone's inner demons, kind of, and how we kind of keep things hidden from others, even though, talking to others and opening up is what's best. And it goes through kind of a roundabout way of saying that, but it is just a great message. And Max, that's kind of her struggle, because from last season, her brother Billy was killed in front of her, and so she's just trying to cope with that, and it ends up going kind of crazy. But something that's been really interesting seeing popping up online, and Mark, I think you pointed this out earlier, was just the song that Max listens to.
Yeah. There was like a whole article about Kate Bush is now experiencing a big surge in popularity thanks to Stranger Things.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
So it's a 1985 song, so it's appropriate. It came out like a year before, or less than a year before, probably this season 4 is taking place. It's called "Running Up That Hill: A Deal with God" in parentheses, and it's like going right back up the charts because of Stranger Things.
Yeah. No, it's a great song, and I knew that song before it got popular with this season, because the cover was done by Placebo, and I really, really love that song. So when I heard it pop up, I was just like, oh man, I love this song, and I didn't know it was a song from the 80s originally, and but it was that song, and we talked about like Elle's song, and like, oh my goodness, the whole like 80s California surfer bro aesthetic was amazing for me. I think it just because like my dad grew up as a California surfer bro in the 80s, so like there's so many like pictures, family home videos you have, and so like that was really fun. But like with the music especially, and this is going to be something that plays into the plot, but I'm not going to say specific things.
I was going to say, like, even like Mark, because you noticed the song from the first episode, it gets even bigger.
It gets way bigger.
The role that it plays in this series is awesome, and it comes back around pretty soon. Pretty soon.
And it was such a great song choice, and just from lyrics, the tone, the feel, like, oh my goodness, it was just such a great choice, and that was a satisfying thing seeing built up as well. So I mean, it's that typical Stranger Things stuff, like, it's very smart, very well crafted, but especially that song I think was a strong point.
That's what Stranger Things does, right? I mean, it's a series that's built on, well, not just built on nostalgia. I mean, luckily, it's like, as you've pointed out, it's a very well crafted and well executed series. But its use of 1980s nostalgia, pop culture references, and specifically music is one of the big things, right?
And I think it appeals to Generation Xers and Millennials who grew up in that time period where, like me and
when
Josh
everything was awesome,
probably remember the 80s, and then also, to me, it really evokes Spielberg and those movies like E.T. and even other non-Spielberg movies like Explorers and The Goonies, which I think he produced. I mean, it's kids dealing with supernatural stuff, solving problems, and it's from the kids' point of view for the most part.
But we're here to talk about the music, right? Because the Stranger Things soundtrack is just a perfect example of, just a great use of music to underscore character, to tell story, to create and provide great moments. And so we finally have, like, we have an undeniable excuse to finally deliver our soundtrack themed episode. I don't think we can put it off any longer after this. So thanks to Kate Bush, thanks to Stranger Things. How about we talk about some soundtracks, guys?
Let's do it.
Correct.
So now in our previous discussions in trying to figure out how to do this, I think that what we decided was that we wanted to break this up a little bit, because you have something along like the Stranger Things kind of line, which is that the soundtrack is a collection of previously released, pop music or something like that, versus your John Williams scores, and Danny Elfman, where it's, or Gladiator or whatever. And so we're going to talk about, for this episode, we're going to zero in on the various artists compilation soundtracks. But also, and I think that we already kind of knew this, but just to kind of clarify also, we're not talking about musicals. So it's not, we won't be discussing like our favorite musical soundtracks
Cannot
in
any
this episode
Broadway
either.
kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. So it's not like Phantom of the Opera or,
Yeah.
because otherwise I'd just talk about cats the whole time. Right. So, but yeah, no. And so we've kind of picked out some favorites, which I think we'll get to in a moment, but maybe we can just kind of talk about some general observations and like what we think about as like good rules or good ideas for what makes for a, what makes, before you guys reveal what your favorite soundtracks are, what would you say makes for a good movie soundtrack in the parameters we've discussed?
Well, I think for me, one of the things is I like to be introduced to new songs. I mean, this is maybe just a very subjective rule, but for me, when you're introduced to new songs or new artists that you've maybe never heard before, or maybe you hear maybe a cover of something that you've never heard before, I love that. I love it when it's like, and it's a good song, obviously. Like, I mean, you want to hear good music, and that can help it can help elevate a movie in my mind.
Yes.
So that's part of it. And also, like, if it fits into the story. Sometimes a song is chosen that fits perfectly into a certain plot point or matches a character.
Yeah.
And it just, again, it can enhance the experience. It can elevate the movie. It can even, it can make maybe even a mediocre movie just that much better by a really just killer soundtrack.
Yeah. Agreed. Dani, how about you?
I loved those points because, and this is kind of a great roundabout way to do maybe a few shout outs that didn't make the list, but so you said being introduced to new music, like that's how I got into like Regina Spektor and Lana Del Rey, like because they were featured during like the credits in a movie, some of their songs, and they're just beautiful voices.
And Celine Dion too, right?
And Celine Dion,
I'm sorry.
of course.
I'm sorry.
Are you
My
thinking
heart will always go on.
Are you thinking of 500 Days of Summer?
Maybe.
Sorry, I hope I didn't spoil yours because there's a great. I agree with you on Regina Spektor.
When we were talking about maybe having this as a top 5, it made my top 5, but it did not make my top 3. So
okay.
Yeah.
But but there are a lot of just artists like that. Young and Beautiful from The Great Gatsby is probably my all-time favorite song. Just stuff like that where I've really enjoyed being able to be introduced to artists like that. So thank you for making that point. So I don't feel bad about not having them on my list.
Name drop away. Like I had a hard. In some ways, I almost feel like it was harder to come up with these 3 than my 3 movies. And so we can, maybe we like focus on 3 so that we, so the podcast comes in under 5 hours. But but absolutely, I mean, I reference because partially because of what Mark said. Like I love that I have been introduced to so many favorite songs through soundtracks that's one of the biggest values I see from the whole exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So and I would just add from there that a lot of it is just so nostalgic for me. I think music's one of those things that are just really tied to memory. I know there have been a lot of like really cool studies. Primarily, I've seen this in conjunction with Coco when that was released. How music like helps people who who are starting to like forget things or whatever. You play a song for them and it triggers things in them, and it's quite incredible. But like all my stuff, I'm just like, oh, you guys are gonna laugh at my taste in music. But they're very like it's me. These are things that I love, right? Because I have such strong memories tied to these songs, to the soundtracks. Like I have experiences listening to the soundtrack outside of watching the movie. And or while watching the movie and hearing those songs, right? So there's a lot of memories tied to it, right?
So I'm gonna jump off that point and expand it just a little bit because I also love the idea that movie moments are tied into very specific memories and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What I've loved even more on very rare occasions are when a particular song is used in a movie that I had an association with elsewhere that is improved or changed because of its use in the movie.
Yeah.
So it's almost kind of like it can build
Oh, that just reminded
new
me of another
memories
song. How
or
dare you do
deepen,
this? Oh, dang.
No, because,
The list keeps growing for me.
whether it's introducing new music, whether it's using your favorite music, whether it is creating a moment, because there are favorite songs that were in soundtracks.
Yeah.
So think of the difference between, like, because you describe how sometimes the songs are used over the credits. Well, you're not going to remember the closing credits. That's just a favorite song that happened to be introduced there, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to songs that were used at a particular moment in a movie that was just perfect and that brought everything together and just put it over the top, And I love all of it. I love, there are so many movies that I adore so many more times over because of their soundtracks.
Yeah.
I think, it's funny because I'm one of those people that I listen to music just over and over and over. Like, I know some people don't do that, and for me, there's just something in my brain that loves listening to the same album over and over and over, and it's the same way with soundtracks. And one of the reasons some of my favorite movies are my favorite movies is because of the soundtrack, because not only do you get to enjoy the visual over and over, but you could just have it on without even watching the screen if it's that good of a soundtrack, And so, but yeah, that association is interesting. I think of like scenes in Happy Feet, for example. I mean, this isn't one on my list, but I was thinking, I was thinking of "I Wish," that song by
I would have
Stevie
assumed
Wonder.
it would have been the number one on your list would be Happy Feet.
This is kind of weird, but the very first time I heard that song was on Stevie Wonder Night on American Idol, and I remember just loving it so much. And I was like, I even turned to Holly. I'm like, this is like one of the best songs. And we ended up getting the Stevie Wonder anthology, and it was on there, luckily. And then they played it on Happy Feet, and it's the scene where he's. Do you remember the plot of Happy Feet? Like, he can't sing. He has no voice. Have you seen Happy Feet?
No.
I've seen it. I have no memory.
Okay, well, really quick.
Why would I have watched Happy Feet?
Well, I mean, it was a great movie, and it was the Oscar winner for Best Animated Feature for that year.
Was it really?
I think it was 2006 or so.
Oh,
but anyway,
my word. Wow.
Like, all the penguins, the way that they attract their mates and the way that they kind of mature is they sing. Like, they sing a song, and they develop these beautiful voices, and it's just what every penguin does. It's just part of them. It's part of the natural order of things. But the main character in Happy Feet cannot sing. He just sort of squawks in this sort of ungodly screeching sound. But then he discovers dance. He discovers the joy of dance. And the scene where he's just dancing up a storm, the camera swirls around him, and it plays Stevie Wonder's "I Wish." And it's a really nice moment. It's a great moment, and you can probably find it on YouTube. But like, that's an example of where it elevates both the movie and I think the song for me, which already is a great song. Yeah,
you can't go wrong with Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
I will argue that all day long for sure. Nice.
I think you mentioned, and just Regina Spektor's, the opening scene of 500 Days of Summer when Us is playing, and it has the split screen with both of their childhoods, Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Zooey Deschanel, and different scenes from their childhood, and it's playing that song. They made a statue of Us. It's great.
Oh, I love her stuff. That's probably my top played Pandora radio station is Regina Spektor.
She's great. I've seen her a couple of times in concert, and she's awesome.
I'm so jealous. I'd love to. Love to.
Well, okay, so I'm going to push things ahead here because as we're having this discussion, more soundtracks are springing to mind.
Right.
And if we don't start going through our lists, I'm going to have to be making changes, and it's going to drive me crazy. So maybe we ought to just jump in head first. And
yeah.
But I don't know who wants to kick it off this time. Anybody want to?
I think
lead off?
I think my soundtracks are going to be the least impressive if we wanted to get mine over with. Because here's the thing, I'm not much of a music.
Did you choose Happy Feet?
No. No.
Did you choose any animated film soundtracks?
I did not. Aren't we proud of me? What? I'm growing up.
The evolution of the Utah Film Pod.
Well, it's funny because there's a very similar thread with every single one of these songs that I pick. So there's definitely something I'm really looking for when it comes to a really good soundtrack, I think, just with what sticks with me. Because,
Okay.
I mean, I could listen to anything. I don't mind. But it's like I don't have strong opinions when it comes to music. I kind of prefer a lot of, like, instrumental stuff typically. That might be the film score, side of things.
Yeah.
I really like diegetic music, music that is used within the story, like a character is performing or something like that. These aren't musicals, though, except for maybe one of them, so I kind of cheated a little bit.
It's okay.
So I have to give an honorable mention to August Rush, which is mostly instrumental for the soundtrack, but I grew up listening to that soundtrack so much. I used it for, like, my alarm to wake up in the morning, just because, like, it was just very soothing. It was very fun, and I really loved those songs. But my number 3 pick for my soundtrack playlist is the Lizzie McGuire movie soundtrack.
Wow, okay.
And this is kind of also just to give a little nod to all the blonde female flicks of that era, primarily that were starring Hilary Duff.
Okay.
So I'd say, like, a Cinderella Story is kind of in this same vein, or Legally Blonde. So these kind of, female films, right? That I grew up with as a preteen. But the Lizzie McGuire movie especially just has all these iconic songs where if I went like, hey now, to, like, just a crowd of girls between the age of, like, 20 to 40, they would all give me a hey now back. And then we would sing together, This Is What Dreams Are Made Of. Like, this was a defining soundtrack, and so I think it's so iconic, and I absolutely love it. My second pick would be a musical pick, technically. I love the Tick Tick Boom soundtrack so much from the 2021 release of that movie. Part of it, I gotta love Andrew Garfield's voice. It's amazing. It's perfect. But also, these songs are just on my mind all the time. I was actually kind of a little disturbed when I first watched this movie. I didn't know how to feel about it. Because, the whole movie is about being a creative 20-something, approaching your 30s, and not knowing how you're supposed to pursue these ambitions you have. And it's just, that's honestly kind of what I ask myself every day as I'm driving to school. The song Johnny Can't Decide especially just hits this, where it's like, do I want to be like Susan, who is kind of giving up on her art altogether? Really, she's just settling. She wants to have a nice, quiet life. Do I redirect my dream like Michael, where he's still creative, but it's in the business world, so he's, like, really successful in making money, but, he doesn't have complete creative freedom? Or do I just stubbornly hold on to my dream, where I am just going to keep living in this crappy apartment and, not having enough time? I honestly do think this movie kind of shows why Jonathan Larson died so young. I don't know how this guy didn't die of a heart attack earlier on, I think it was a brain aneurysm that killed him. So it's just like, it's just absolute chaos the way he lived, but he was just so brilliant, and these songs show it. So it's kind of meta, where it's like these brilliant songs that are brilliantly made, talking about how you want to dedicate to this life of writing such amazing music. Like, I don't know how to describe that perfectly, but my goodness.
It's music about making music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Music about making a musical, and I guess more specifically, music about the struggle and the suffering that goes into making a musical that may never be shown.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, when I saw the movie, I didn't know that. I thought that this was something like Lin-Manuel Miranda just made up.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that Jonathan Larson did make that musical about making that musical. The suburbia, I can't remember what the first one was called, but yeah, I thought it was brilliant too. I loved it. And that song Therapy, I listened to that like 100 times. I'd always watch that clip on YouTube with the little duet.
No, it's so good. And they're just very fun, but also just really reflective. I think you have your 30-90, your Therapy, Come to Your Senses, the big kind of numbers that are just like really incredible. One that I think is kind of underappreciated is Sunday, like the one where they're like having brunch and he's, mocking all of these people. But it comes at an interesting point, and I think it shows how narratively this movie is so incredible, because what's happening in the real world is he's about to have a panic attack because he's like, I need to be in 100 different places, but I'm stuck here serving these whiny customers. Why are they here when I need to be focusing on all these other things? And in his music mind, he escapes, and it's this, heavenly choir singing about toast and orange juice and coffee, and it's this beautiful, overdramatic moment, but it really, you get this really amazing inside look into his mind where it's like, this is his coping mechanism. And I don't know, just stuff like that where it's so good. I have a hard time watching the movie because it does stress me out where I'm like, I'm not close to my 30s, I know that, but like in my head I am, and I'm just like,
it's okay, Dani. I'm not close to my 30s either.
Yeah, me neither.
oh my gosh.
But I am fascinated. I am fascinated to know, as much as you love this movie soundtrack, what could possibly have beat it out. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, how is this not number one?
Yeah, no,
and I'm also thinking that you broke the rules, but I'm totally okay with it.
Yeah,
I love the music from it, but it's a musical.
Here's the thing. I feel like it's
that is totally a musical.
So, listen. I think it's not quite a musical because what happens is you are seeing his life in a narrative cinematic way, but there's also this side plot where they're kind of recording in this off-Broadway theater his musical. So you are seeing, because it's not necessarily like he's always breaking out into song in the real world. There's kind of this divide. So like I felt like I could get away with it, but it's fine.
That's okay. If it helps, one of my choices is going to bend the rules slightly as well.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah,
not as dramatically as you've bent the rules, but it still bends the rules.
Okay, so whatever. See, this is why I wanted to go first and get this out of the way. But no, and it's funny you say that because like I think Tick Tick Boom is going to be in my top 3 movies. It might end up being my number 1 favorite soundtrack eventually. It's just like I said, with the nostalgia is so important. Where this is a very recent movie, so I don't know if I'm like just going through a phase and I need to listen to this album on repeat until I graduate just to stay sane, or if this is something where it's like, no, this was an amazing part of my life that I really want to hold on to. So it's to be determined. My number 1 pick, I've been listening to this one on repeat for years since it was introduced to me by our good friend Travis Poppleton, and It is the soundtrack of Inside Llewyn Davis. And this one really encapsulates a lot of my music taste. I think I really like the folk kind of sound. That's another thing I love about Tick Tick Boom is it's very 90s, right? And I like 90s music. It's a lot more chill, a lot of instrumental stuff like acoustic. And Inside Llewyn Davis, I think, is beautiful. Again, I love it when the main character is performing, right? And my main theme that I notice with all my choices, the thing that's probably most important to me when it comes to a soundtrack is this underdog artist storyline, where it's like, I think why it's so important to have a good soundtrack for those kind of stories is that, the creators of the film know that they have to have a protagonist that's very talented, but also kind of like down on their luck. So like, we as an audience, we're really rooting for them. Our hearts go out to them, right? Because we just want to be telling the world, like, why aren't they, the next pop star? They're so good. So the music has to be absolutely fantastic. And I think it really is an Inside Llewyn Davis. I love all the songs. And then the memory that I really have tied to these songs is that my freshman year of college, I was going to BYU. Ryan was going to Weber. And every weekend I would ride the train 2 hours north to spend the weekend with him. And then come Monday morning, I would take the 2-hour train ride back. And I just listen to the Inside Llewyn Davis soundtrack on repeat. And it's just amazing travel music. Because, a lot of it is kind of like them traveling in a car and trying to get things on the move. And I don't know, looking over, during that ride, you're watching so much of Utah pass by, just a lot of kind of nothing with hills and old train tracks that have been abandoned. And I think it's such a beautiful trip. And so I just always kind of I don't know, have that and the soundtrack tied together, and it's kind of this beautiful memory in my mind. So that's why it's my number one.
Were you traveling with a cat on the train?
Like Lou and David? I wish.
Nice.
Oh gosh.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so now this is part of this is my nagging English professor side coming out.
Oh goodness.
But I don't know, did you mention, because I have a kind of a similar conversation when I first opened my English classes, we have a class discussion about that includes like naming some of your favorite music. Uh-huh. So you named the Lizzie McGuire movie. Did you mention any of the artists who play on that soundtrack? Because I think you referenced one of the songs, but
like two of them are performed by Hilary Duff.
Okay.
I cannot remember. No, but that's the thing. I'm not much of a music person, and that's why I felt intimidated about this episode, because it's like I don't follow people. I'm not like a big music fan.
Gotcha.
I follow directors in the same way people follow Taylor Swift. So,
I like it. No, because I thought that, just in the spirit of like anybody listening who wants to check it out, this is kind of, maybe go listen to this person, person. So
I'm someone who believes in when you're listening to a soundtrack, you should be listening to them in the order that is played out. It's kind of like that mixtape idea where it's like there's kind of a narrative with those songs. And like I remember for the Liz McGuire movie soundtrack, like which song follows which, because like, there's a narrative there, and same with Inside Llewyn Davis, Tick Tick Boom. Like I don't know. It's not much of a like these certain songs, but it's like, that relationship I have with the sound that the songs that are featured in that movie in that order for that reason. So, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, Mark, do you want to go next, or do you want me to go? Your choice. Your call.
I'll go ahead.
Okay. So we'll see who's stepping on whose toes. I don't know. I don't know. This one might be. I'd be really surprised if you chose a couple of mine, but there are. We'll find out.
Okay.
You go ahead.
All right. So I just thought of something. This is so weird. I don't even know if I should include this movie because I haven't seen the movie. I mean, isn't that crazy? I have a soundtrack that I love so much that I've heard a lot, and I realize I've never seen the movie. So I don't know. I'll throw it out there, but I mean, I have three others. But it's because I was thinking when you said, Dani, when you said like, 90s music is a lot more chill, a lot more acoustic, and I'm thinking, well, I have a counterexample. I beg to differ.
Go ahead.
This is a grunge soundtrack that kind of introduced me. I was already starting to like alternative music in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And this just is such a great kind of group collection of songs that are Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains.
Oh, I think I know it.
Smashing Pumpkins, Paul Westerman. Do you know it? Soundgarden.
I think so.
Chris Cornell.
Yeah.
It's
got to be. No, you say it.
Singles?
Yes.
So you've seen the movie. Yeah, I should probably let you take this one then, because I'm sure you've seen the movie.
No, because I think I've only seen pieces of the movie.
Okay.
Interesting.
I know I've seen specific scenes. I don't ever remember sitting down and watching the entire movie, but I completely understand what you're saying, because there are movies that like you almost become more familiar with the soundtrack before you actually even see the movie, if you see the movie at all. So I am with you 100%.
Yeah, I plan to see it. I should see it. I mean, it's got a cover of a Led Zeppelin song, The Battle of Evermore. It has two Pearl Jam songs, and I love Pearl Jam, but I've never heard anywhere else. State of Breath and State of Love and Trust. I haven't heard those songs anywhere else, just on the soundtrack. And this is like when they were starting too. This is like 93-ish. I don't remember the actor, maybe 92. It came out after 10, but probably not too long after 10, which was their first album. And then Mudhoney, I don't know anything about Mudhoney. I just know they're one song on the soundtrack, and it's awesome. Anyway.
So was Mudhoney? So here we go on our tangents, right?
Yeah.
Was Mudhoney the name of the band that became Pearl Jam?
I don't.
Or was it one of those? Some members of Pearl Jam and some members of Soundgarden get together, because I know
you're thinking of Mother Love Bone. I think
maybe
Mother
that's what I
Love
was
Bone.
thinking of.
Yeah. And they have a song on here. It's Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns. That's kind of their main song. And I used to have. I mean, when I got into grunge in the early '90s, I got all of it. I mean, I got the Mother Love Bone album that had that, and This Is Shangri-La, you know, early Pearl Jam stuff, and Stone Temple Pilots, which isn't on the single soundtrack. But it's just really cool music that kind of, I think it kind of introduced the world to like the Seattle scene. You know.
So now I have to ask. So since you got into the single soundtrack, at the same period, did you ever find yourself getting into the Crow soundtrack?
I am not sure. If you name some songs, I may know them, but I don't remember.
Okay. No, I mean, that was half of a joke.
Oh, wait a minute.
Just
no,
because,
I do remember, because it had
you remember the Crow soundtrack?
Big Empty. Yeah, it had the Stone Temple Pilots song on it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't
that.
go as far as calling it a grunge soundtrack, but it really was like this moody goth, you know, industrial. Like, I think there might have been some Nine Inch Nails or some Trent Reznor on there, you know.
And it would have been around the same time, probably within that 2-3 year period.
And I figured it was a safe bet for something you wouldn't have chosen.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I'm still waiting to hear the name of a band that I know.
Oh, wow. Pearl Jam?
You haven't heard of Pearl Jam, huh?
No, I'm telling you, I am so out of my element here. Oh my gosh.
I'm
just start taking notes, Dani.
I guess.
There's a song
Today is the first day of the rest of your life.
Yeah, May This Be Love. I mean, it's not even one of his well-known songs, but it's a great Jimi Hendrix song on that
Jimi Hendrix one? Yeah,
soundtrack. Okay. It's always nice to introduce people to, like, new music, because, like, you know, Pearl Jam, and just being a kid that grew up in the 80s and 90s, that was, you know, I feel like everybody had heard of them then, but, you know, they were never exactly
I probably
mainstream.
made my parents just, like, facepalm. They're like, where did we go wrong?
Okay. So, I don't know. That may be a weird pick since I haven't seen the movie, but the other movies I promise I've seen.
I think that's totally fair.
Okay, so another one is Forrest Gump.
Ooh, okay.
Great soundtrack. Ooh. I remember we had the 2-disc set that I think was I can't remember if I owned it or if it was like I gave it to my sister, but I listened to it a lot, and it was just, it is an anthology of American folk and rock music, really, from all the way from the 50s to the 80s. I mean, it's almost like a best of, list from those time periods, from like mid 50s to probably mid 80s. And I mean, anybody you can name, Elvis Presley, right? Dani, you've heard of Elvis. I mean, The Doors.
Got it.
There's Joan Baez, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Dylan, Beach Boys, The Supremes. I mean, it's
The Doors.
Classic.
Yeah, and I remember sitting in the theater too, and this was a great experience too, because I saw this movie when it came out in 1994, and it was around the same time that it was a little bit after I had started listening to The Doors, and I didn't discover them. Of course, millions and millions of people had heard them, but I remember the first time I heard them was at work, where I worked as a painter at a property management company, and all the guys would bring their CDs, and we'd put them in the CD player, and we'd just play music all day while we were like working and painting. And somebody brought the Best of the Doors, which is a 2-disc set, and I hadn't heard of them, but I started hearing the music and listening to Light My Fire and Hello, I Love You, and Break On Through. I'm like, this is a really cool song. What is this? And somebody said The Doors, and I just instantly loved all the songs. And then I'm sitting in the theater watching Forrest Gump, and one thing they don't have on the soundtrack is in the movie itself, they play like 5 Doors songs.
Right.
Like if you watch the Vietnam scene, they're playing, and then the part of the scene when Jenny is having her struggles and being on drugs in Las Vegas, and she looks like she's about to commit suicide. They're playing.
Was that Love Her Madly?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You remember that? Yeah. So you just never forget some of these scenes, and they're playing Love Her Madly and Soul Kitchen, which is not a well-known Doors song.
Right.
Break On Through, which is the one that's on the soundtrack. And I remember sitting next to my cousin. I'm like, this is the Doors. Again, this is the Doors. Like telling him, letting him know that I know these songs. And but it's just an awesome soundtrack. So many good songs. And Sweet Home Alabama's on there. Yeah.
Let me echo on this one, because I will always associate this soundtrack with the 9 months that I spent working at a movie / music store called The Warehouse. And during the window when I worked at that place, when I was kind of in my late teens, I will every major album that we would play on like the store PA always instantly takes me back to like that period of my life, right? And the Forrest Gump soundtrack was one that we just played over and over and over and over again. I think that regardless of whether it is a favorite, the Forrest Gump soundtrack is one of the most celebrated soundtracks. You know, just because, you know, when you think about the all-time, you know, certainly most prolific ones, because like you said, I mean, it covers decades upon decades, and it's this, you know, sprawling 2 CD set that doesn't even cover everything that was in the movie. That's one of the ones I think is that most people kind of think of as, oh yeah, that's like one of the all-time great, you know, and I hadn't even really thought about it in this way until you brought it up, but where so many period movies focus on music from a specific window, Forrest Gump, I mean, it's covering like 30 plus years worth of pop music.
Yep. And it makes sense for the movie, since that's what it, you know, that's the life of Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
It's good because it helps orient you to time and place when you're or even just kind of somewhat familiar with music from certain time periods, like that they're showing you as it's going along through the decades. That, oh, Running on Empty, now we're in the 80s. You know, like it just does that in the movie really well. So loved it.
Great choice.
Okay. Next choice is I'm going to go a little bit more, well, it's more of a modern movie, but it's similar music, and it's Guardians of the Galaxy. Hopefully I'm not stealing any of yours, but that is awesome. I mean, from the very opening scene, well, I guess not the very opening scene, but, you know, he's on that, like, alien planet, kicking those weird lizard things, and he's listening to the Walkman, listening to Hooked on a Feeling.
Nope.
I believe.
Come and Get Your Love by Redbone.
Come and Get Your Love. You're right.
Yep.
Hooked on a Feeling, that was the trailer.
That was the prison scene. Well, they used it in the trailer, but then it was used in the prison scene. That's when they're all, because that's the one where Quill gets mad and he's like, that's Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Suede. That's my song, because the guy like had confiscated it, and he's like, the alien's listening to his Walkman. Yeah, trust me, there's a specific reason I remember this, and I'm going to get to it in a minute.
Oh, okay. So, but the cool thing, another thing I like about the soundtrack is, because you know, and Dani talked a little bit about diegetic and non-diegetic sound. In this movie, there's both, right? And because there's diegetic is when the characters on the screen hear the music that we're hearing. And sometimes they're singing along or whatever. But
thank you for clarifying that term that I knew totally what you were talking about.
Oh, sorry.
And so, and it's a special set of songs because this is the awesome mix, right? This is the tape that his mom had made, and then it was sort of his meaningful, almost only connection to his life on Earth. You know, his pre-galactic life when he was an Earthling, and he, you know, he has this Walkman with this awesome mix, and there's an awesome mix volume 2, and you can listen to both of them on YouTube, and they're just full of, and it's kind of like what I was saying at the beginning of our discussion on this. It introduced me to a lot of songs I hadn't heard before, and a lot of artists I hadn't heard before. Like, I didn't know Hooked on a Feeling. Maybe I'm the only one. You know, Come and Get Your Love. I knew some David Bowie, but I didn't know Moon Age Daydream. There's some great classics here of that sort of late 70s, early 80s time period.
Well, and I love, and this, I guess this is what you're kind of already pointing out, but I love how not only are these classics of a period, but they specifically are targeting songs that have such a fun, kind of innocent, upbeat vibe. You know, kind of like you say, it's the awesome mix, right? These aren't just random songs that happen to come out, that happen to be popular over like 10, 15 years. Like, this is a soundtrack to cheer you up. Yeah. This is a soundtrack to make you feel happy.
Right.
And I adore that about
great.
this soundtrack.
Yeah. And like I said, the characters, I mean, especially the Star-Lord, Peter Quill, he knows these songs. He's probably memorized the words to all
Well,
of them.
he's been listening to the same cassette tape for 30 years.
Yeah, right,
so
Yeah, it's kind of good.
which is kind of funny if you think about it.
And his knowledge of the song,
how that thing survived.
Right, and it kind of helps at the end of the movie. It helps them escape a certain, fate that may be coming to them, and he's singing and dancing to one of the songs, that no one else knows what's going on, and so it's important. It's more than just like background music. It's a part of the movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right.
So that's number one, or were yours like three in no particular order,
Oh,
or was that?
I forgot. I had another one, but because I had singles one, I feel like was a weird one. But I'll just quickly mention Magnolia. I love that soundtrack.
Okay.
That one is Amy Mann, and she does almost all the songs. There's a little bit of Supertramp on there, and a couple other songs, but almost all of them are done by Amy Mann. And just two quick things. One thing I like about that is that Paul Thomas Anderson said that it was Amy Mann's lyrics. Like, it was those songs that inspired some of the scenes and some things that are in the movie. So, for example, in the movie, there's a character that meets another character that, like, this guy kind of instantly falls in love with this girl that he really shouldn't be with for reasons that are very obvious in the movie. And she doesn't want to be with him either, but she doesn't know how to tell him. And she says, "Now that I've met you, would you object to never seeing each other again?" And that's an exact lyric from one of the songs in the movie, an Amy Mann song. And so that's a line in the movie. And so that's really cool. It says, "Now that I've met you, would you object to never seeing each other again? I can't afford to climb aboard you. No one's got that much ego to spend." And it's a lyric in that song, that Amy Mann song. And then there's another scene, and this is an ensemble movie where there's a lot of different characters that are going through different things in their life, but there's similarities thematically, such as estrangement and things like that. And there's this kind of interesting scene in the middle of the movie where they all sing an Amy Mann song. Almost they do it like a music video where they're all singing this song called "Wise Up" by Amy Mann, where it's as if they're all kind of listening to the song, like maybe on their own radios, and it shows each character just kind of sadly singing verses of that song, and it cuts to different, to each of them doing it. And it seems a little out of place, but it makes sense within the context of the movie. There's different ways that their stories are drawn together, but then you see that they all need to wise up. They kind of need to follow the advice in the song. So that one I like. I've always loved that soundtrack. And the very opening song is a Harry Nilsson song that Amy Mann covers. And it's interesting because it's, one is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. And then, and there's a lot of loneliness in the movie itself. Anyway, that's another one that I like.
Very tied together.
Yeah, nice. It ties it together. So, cool. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, Mark, I am really glad that you chose Guardians of the Galaxy because I wasn't going to choose Guardians of the Galaxy, but I did want to shoehorn it in as an honorable mention, and you've set that up perfectly. So I can now kind of bandwagon yours and not have to feel like I'm I'm cheating. But aside from the stuff we've already talked about, Guardians of the Galaxy as a movie and as a soundtrack is going to always be a very, very fond connection for me because it was the last movie that I saw with my dad before he passed away a few years ago. And then while my family was in the process of kind of putting everything together for the funeral and making all the arrangements, we had to get away just to kind of get a break. And we went and saw Guardians of the Galaxy, and so that movie is always going to be kind of connected to that. But even on a more specific level, that opening scene where Peter Quill is on the moon, the planet or whatever, and he's kicking the little alien rat things and singing in their mouths like they're microphones. The reason I remember that song, because it's the Redbone song, is because that is one of, and this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier in our discussion, where that is one of the only times I can ever remember a song that I disliked because of a negative association being turned into one of my all-time favorite songs because of a new association. Because, and I'll give the streamlined version of this so that we don't, A, so we don't extend the podcast too long, and B, so that I don't get sued by anybody who's involved in this story. So I had always associated that song with a party that, Mark, you might have actually been at, that I just hated. It was about a girl. It was about a bunch of guys who showed up to the party with a girl, and that song was featured prominently in like one of the low points of the evening. And so I'd always associated it with this horrible party. And then I see it in Guardians of the Galaxy in such a funny scene. And then I have this attachment to my dad, and it's just like, it was a complete 180-degree flip from, oh, that song to, oh man, this has just got such, I love how it's like I rescued that song, or like the movie rescued that song. Even to the point now, I've even got my Star-Lord with the Walkman Funko from that actual scene that is one of the first ones I got for now obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But that's
sweet though.
Yeah,
I love that.
so that was, oh, thank you. No, that had to be that, because that's the thing, is like, I don't know that so it was really easy for me to choose two of the soundtracks on my list, but narrowing down that third one was really, really difficult.
Right.
And Guardians was a contender, but I kind of thought of my number 3 soundtrack in terms of a concept, and I don't think it would be the best example of that concept. And one of the things that I noticed as I thought about, my favorite soundtracks and things, was that there are directors who seem to have a very, very specific reputation for choosing very memorable, very, well executed soundtracks. And, Quentin Tarantino is one of them. If you've heard the Pulp Fiction soundtrack, it is absolutely iconic. The way that they drop Jungle Bookie into that one at the beginning of the movie is incredible.
And Mr. Lou, I think, is the opening one.
Yeah, Mr. Lou, with
yeah.
Dick Dale and the Deltones. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, that one. Another guy I was thinking, the Coen brothers, their soundtracks are, we've already talked about Lou and Davis, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
so that, I'm glad you brought that one out.
Yeah.
One of the other ones I was thinking about was Wes Anderson. I mean, all of his soundtracks, from Rushmore, just his use of, I adore the Kinks. And so the way that the Kinks are used, in not just Rushmore, but he used a bunch of their songs in the Darjeeling Limited a few years later. It was fantastic. You just said Royal Tenenbaums is incredible. So Wes Anderson, oh my gosh! Now
This really feels like you're cheating by just naming every director with great soundtracks.
Oh right, no, but this is kind of what I'm sorting through, because then you've got I feel so terrible that I'm forgetting his name, Shaun of the Dead, and Edgar Wright, right? And so, because with Baby Driver,
I was thinking that with Baby Driver as you started listing.
Yeah. But the one that I want to choose, and will second guess myself for the rest, is Cameron Crowe, who did Singles, right? And so, but the one that I wanted to choose from Cameron Crowe, because he's done, a number of really fantastic soundtracks. My favorite of his is Almost Famous, the movie from about 20 years ago about the kid who writes for. It's basically kind of like a semi-autobiographical story about a teenage freelance writer who gets a job writing for Rolling Stone. He takes off on the road with this band over the course of a couple months, and his eyes are open to the world of adulthood and the craziness of the rock and roll lifestyle. And this thing is just, Cameron Crowe has a way of just packing in about 3 times as many songs into a soundtrack as you would normally encounter. And Almost Famous has Tiny Dancer, I think, is probably the song that is the most memorable featured moment. There's some great Cat Stevens on there. There's a great Rod Stewart track. There's a really kind of a lesser known Beach Boys song. Speaking of the Beach Boys, it's really great. But it's also one of those ones that took a song that I knew and turned it into a favorite. Like, I had listened to America by Simon and Garfunkel for years and knew it and liked it. But then after seeing it in the context of Almost Famous, just elevated it that much more. Which was funny because that same scene, if you know the movie, was originally going to be the entirety of Led Zeppelin Stairway to Heaven. Like, they were going to actually film an 8-minute scene where the characters are sitting in the living room listening to Stairway to Heaven in its entirety. But, didn't do that.
I've read that too, and there's a part where Cameron Crowe wants you to, he says, hey, you should play this scene, play the scene of the movie, but turn the sound down, but play Stairway to Heaven. Because he really wanted that, and he couldn't get the rights or something.
Yeah.
But I think America works better. When you listen to the lyrics of America and what's going to happen in that movie,
it's
love
more
that.
Appropriate to what...
Right.
Because, the context of the scene is that, Zooey Deschanel is playing, the rebellious teenage daughter who wants to take off and be a stewardess. And this is her way of explaining to her mother why she needs to, go off into the wild blue yonder. And so,
she's going to search for America.
Yeah, Frances McDormand plays the mom, and she is amazing. And she is, anti-rock music. And, they're all on pot, and, this is terrible. And so... so her daughter's forcing her to listen to Simon and Garfunkel and all this. But so with all of those kind of similar choices, as much as I'd want to choose Rushmore, or as much as I'd want to choose Baby Driver or Guardians of the Galaxy, because the Suicide Squad also had some great music. So I think that my choice is going to have to be, for number 3, my number 3 spot's going to have to be Almost Famous.
Nice.
Number 2 is one that I also chose for my 3 movies, which is the soundtrack to the Blues Brothers.
I knew I was going to pick that for you.
Well, and see, but this is what's interesting about that one, is that there is a soundtrack to the Blues Brothers that people are familiar with, and there is a soundtrack that to me was almost more important, that is much more under the radar, because the soundtrack to the movie, it's like the official soundtrack, is a really popular, high sales over the years, and several of those songs are the tracks by, Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, which are good, but not really my favorite stuff, and it also includes the tracks that were recorded by Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles and Cab Calloway. And so the actual officially released CD is very good and has a lot of good stuff. And of course I love and enjoy that. But the reason I picked this one is because the music that didn't make the soundtrack kind of pushed me into a new musical area that seemed almost more significant, because the stuff that wasn't on the soundtrack was stuff like the John Lee Hooker track from Maxwell Street, and them sitting and listening to Louis Jordan when they're in the apartment next to the L train, and he's playing Let the Good Times Roll, and when they're about to start the chase that goes into the mall, and they're listening to Sam and Dave play Soothe Me and Hold On, I'm Coming, and so as I started digging into the soundtrack, who is that? Because that one's not on the CD, so who is this? I want to figure out who this is. That led me into this deep dive of soul music and blues music that just has kind of reverberated throughout my life in terms of just the music that I've loved and appreciated, to the point where, I will regularly, whenever I go to take a trip to Chicago, I'm always going to, one or two of these different blues clubs and listen to some of the same kind of stuff. And so it just kind of has this multi-level thing. And as I suspected, because as we started talking about doing the soundtrack episode, I realized that, the 3 movies that I chose also happen to have fantastic soundtracks. Now, I didn't choose the soundtracks for American Graffiti or for Walter Mitty for this list, but Blues Brothers had to be on there. just kind of for the reasons I described.
For sure.
But
and
so
did you say that was your number 2?
That's my number 2.
So not to throw a question back at you.
You go ahead and throw all the questions you want. Go ahead.
No, I am very surprised that wouldn't be your number 1 then, after all that you said about it. So
it's because my number 1 choice is so much more foundational to my musical tastes and appreciation, to the point where there are probably, I would say, 5 or 6 songs on this soundtrack that I could argue are, if not my all-time favorite song, certainly contenders for the top 10 list. Whereas I can't, as much as I love the Blues Brothers soundtrack, I don't know, there's really only 1 or 2 songs that I would say, oh, well, that's like an all-time favorite song.
Absolutely.
It's more that the music itself kind of led me down a path.
Yeah.
Whereas the one, that I'm building the tension and suspense for, there are, like I said, there are literally a half dozen songs that at any given point in time I could say, yeah, that's my favorite song of all time, or that's like one of my top 10 favorite individual songs. And that one, which unfortunately some people have kind of started to see as a cliche, is the soundtrack to The Big Chill. I don't know, this one used to be more well known, but I get the sense that, with passing generations, it's becoming less and less, just the awareness is not there. Although even, Dani, I'm guessing that you probably would recognize at least half the songs on this soundtrack because they're so frequently used in kind of, throwback classic rock, playlists and stuff. But so what's funny about it, though, is that The Big Chill is this movie that I saw as a kid that is completely conceptually inappropriate for anybody under the age of 25, because the concept of the movie is that there's a group of friends who are kind of in the 1960s, not necessarily hippies, but they were very much about like the counterculture and change the world and all this kind of thing, and one of their group commits suicide. And so they all get together at the home of one of their mutual friends to spend the weekend together, to attend the funeral and to kind of reflect on their lives. And it's set in the early 1980s, and so they're about 10-15 years removed from kind of their heyday. And so they're looking back on, well, this is what we planned on doing with our lives, and instead we all took these paths, and what went wrong, and why did we do this, and so the movie itself is this very kind of adult drama. But it's scored with all of their favorite songs from when they were back in college, and so it's a very 1960s heavy soundtrack, and was played constantly for me as a kid. When our family trips, just driving around town, I mean, I knew this soundtrack front to back, and even though it kind of took time for it to settle in as one of my favorite soundtracks, I still appreciated it as a kid. And so the songs on this largely were responsible for introducing me to Motown and a lot of kind of like 1960s R&B and stuff. But it also had like Creedence Clearwater Revival is on this soundtrack. The Band is on this soundtrack. You also have the Beach Boys, are on it. But one of their non-surfing songs. A song that didn't make the soundtrack but might be one of my favorite songs ever is You Can't Always Get What You Want from the Rolling Stones, which is featured during a funeral scene at the beginning. And Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum is on there. And it's just one after the other that have become so iconic that's why I think people kind of almost looked at the soundtrack as a cliche. Like it was famously criticized in High Fidelity. Jack Black has like his character has some really snide things to say about, oh, well, you can't like anything off the Big Chill soundtrack because it's a cliche, right? Another movie with a great soundtrack, by the way. Just because the Big Chill, just its track record is so, because like I say, from Marvin Gaye doing I Heard It Through the Grapevine, the Rascals doing Good Lovin', you have Tracks My Tears from Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, you have My Girl by the Temptations. It's just one after another that just hits it out of the park. And yeah, just it's kind of one of those ones where I really have a tough time thinking of something that would compete with it. But
those are great songs.
Yeah.
I mean, those are
yeah. I'm looking through them.
No, it's fantastic.
My wife and I went and saw the Temptations with the Utah Symphony at Deer Valley.
Oh, nice.
And that's their big song. It was funny when they announced it because everyone wants them to play it, and it was one of their last 5 or 7 songs they played, and they're like, and now we're going to play the Temptations national anthem, My Girl. That's how they introduced it, because they know that's their biggest song, you know.
Yeah.
Well, but they have a ton of great songs. Holy cow. Like, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
That's just their most famous, but yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great stuff. But man, I mean, we're having this discussion, and I'm thinking, oh, well, what about, like, pirate radio, and what about Sing Street, and all these.
I was wondering if you were
going
to do Sing Street.
No, and it was because, like I said, like I knew for sure that, okay, well, I've got to have Blues Brothers, I've got to have Big Chill, but the third one is kind of this wild card where there's like 3 dozen competitors, and I felt like, well, I want to choose something that represents this idea of the director who's associated with awesome soundtracks, right?
Yeah.
And so should I do a Tarantino one? Should I do a Wes Anderson one? Should I do a Cameron Crowe? Because any of those 3, like, would be excellent choices. But so I'm so glad that Mark brought up Guardians of the Galaxy, because that way I could kind of shoehorn that. Because that one, like I said, even if they hadn't included any more music for the rest of that movie, that opening scene would have been a heartfelt one for me. So
yeah, it's a great one. It's such a funny movie too, such an underrated comedy. I was just gonna say, I remember being in the theater and not expecting to really laugh that much at a superhero movie, and we just laughed the whole time. I mean, it's so many jokes in it, and Steven Spielberg released a list a couple years ago of his top 20 movies of all time, and that was the newest one. That was
really?
the most recent one. It was like
fun.
2014, I think, was Guardians of the Galaxy.
2014, yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's a great one.
Well, my mind started going in this tangent of, like, second-guessing myself, right? But I'm like, there are some where it's, like, kind of funny. And, like, my mind hadn't even gone there to consider ones like that, But then I started thinking of ones like Shrek, the first and second one, have really good soundtracks, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Or, like, Pitch Perfect, I think, is really, really good. But, like, it's kind of goofy. The characters are sort of goofy, right? Another one that applies with the whole, like, struggling artist thing, great. But
those are great. Those are great lists, too.
Part of what was hard, too, is that I could think of soundtracks that had one great song, but maybe not the whole soundtrack. Because, I mean, the Karate Kid, the way that they use that song at the closing month, is so awesome. It's so funny. Or the Back to the Future soundtrack, right? Power of Love has got to be one of the all-time soundtrack songs.
Right? So good.
I mean, because of my age, I didn't listen to a lot of top 40 pop music when I was a kid growing up in the 80s, because I didn't have any older siblings, and so like I said, most of the time driving around in the car, I was listening to my parents' tapes, right? So we were listening to Big Chill. But the contemporary music I was exposed to was usually the stuff that was in movies, and so it was, it was Power of Love. It was the Ghostbusters theme with Ray Parker Jr.
Danger Zone.
Danger Zone, right? Exactly. Perfect. And so that's I knew that stuff long before I really kind of embraced, because I had this great kind of phase later on in life where I kind of went back and discovered, for me, the first time, a lot of the music that was popular while I was a kid, but I just wasn't aware of it. Like, the Specials and the English Beat and the Clash and all this stuff.
I went through the same thing. Yeah, I did not like. I always say I did not like 80s music in the 80s. Like, I just didn't listen to it in the 80s, even the early 90s. It was either 60s music, like, Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Creedence, Jimi Hendrix. I was listening to that stuff when I was like 13, 12, 13, 14, or it was there was a little bit of a butt rock phase, I guess, Guns N' Roses and those guys, but then it was the grunts. It was like all of that Nirvana, Pearl Jam,
Right.
stuff. So yeah, but then later I discovered, well, I mean, I didn't discover, but we talked about that.
For
U2
you.
and Depeche Mode for me, U2, The Cure, and this is like in my 20s. I'm like, wow, they're amazing, Yeah.
I have a question for you guys. And this
Yes.
might be like an ending question just to because we've been recording for so long. But
Hey, honestly, we are considering what I thought this could have been. We're doing okay.
We'll have to release this as a double disc set, like the Forrest Gump.
There we
soundtrack.
go.
Flip the
There we
cassette
go.
over. You can now flip to side B. I was just thinking with what Josh was saying about like how there will be like one song that you really enjoy, and something that I noticed too is like, and then I'm wondering if you guys have a song like this, but a song that you're just excited every time it comes up in a movie, because there's a lot of songs that are kind of repeatedly used, right? And the one that I would pick for this for me is "Where Is My Mind," where I love it when and there will be like different variations of it. Like, Mark, I think you mentioned this where it's like a soundtrack that like you've never even seen the movie before. I love the soundtrack for Sucker Punch, but I've never seen that movie. But like they have a cover of "Where Is My Mind" in it, and like there's a piano version of it that's just gorgeous. Or of course, the classic. Fight Club, that ending, like, oh my goodness, it's so good. Like every time
Because that was the original one, wasn't it?
That's the original.
Like the one in Fight Club was the Pixies version.
Yeah. And that's a song that people have said like it being featured in a movie boosted it, right? So there's an argument for it there. But I love that song. I think it's got these fun lyrics. It can be kind of manipulated. Like I think it was used in a Mr. Robot promotional ad thing. Where it was kind of like digitized sort of. So like I think it's just such a malleable song that I love it every time that it pops up. So I wondered if you guys had a song that.
That is a cool scene when they're, I think, Helena Bonham Carter and Ed Norton are holding hands watching the buildings explode, and that's the song that's playing, right?
Yeah. Just with
and
that
it's
guitar.
showing them from the back. Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's a great
cool.
ending scene.
So Dani, I've got an answer to your question that might not totally fit the question, but I think will still work.
Okay.
Because because I'm sure I have more appropriate answers that I'm just not thinking of right now, and I'll probably think of 5 minutes after we stop the recording.
And then we'll be like texting each other afterwards, like, "Oh, I can't believe."
Right. Yeah, can you dub this over my, and have this have me say this instead? No, but because one that was kind of fun was not necessarily a song that's like an all-time favorite song that I love it whenever it pops up, but it was a song. Well, see, now I'm thinking of like more examples too,
right?
Where, because I've had, now that I'm thinking of it, multiple encounters where a song that I previously liked but never really expected to hear in a movie came up and was just kind of this bonus, like, oh, that's awesome. I can't believe they're using such and such, right?
Yeah.
The first one that sprang to mind is at the very beginning of Endgame, the Avengers Endgame, when they use Traffic's "Dear Mr. Fantasy," and which is obscure enough that you might not know what I'm talking about, just as I'm describing it.
Yeah.
But it's the song that I loved back when I was kind of in my psychedelic 60s phase as a teen, wearing tie-dyed shirts and listening to early Steve Winwood and all this kind of stuff, and to hear that just pop up out of nowhere on Endgame was great. Another one, kind of on a similar note, the original the first Doctor Strange movie uses a really obscure early track from Pink Floyd called Interstellar Overdrive. Like when he gets in his Lamborghini and takes off on his drive right before he wrecks, Interstellar Overdrive is the track that's playing, and it's like nothing even close to The Wall or even Dark Side of the Moon. It was literally on their first album with their original lead singer, who got kind of kicked out of the band because he had drug issues and psychiatric breakdowns and stuff.
That's it,
but yeah. It was one of it's just a purely instrumental track, but I'm watching Doctor Strange and hey, Interstellar Overdrive, right on, you know. So it's not something that I've seen more than once that it's like, oh, I love it whenever they use this song, but it still kind of had a fun, once I heard it, I was just excited to hear it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that a lot.
Yeah.
Mark, do you have a song that you like when it pops up? Or
I mean, I like the use of Arcade Fire's "Wake Up" in "The Secret Life of Walter Mitty."
Oh,
that's a really
gosh,
cool
yeah.
scene.
Yeah.
And that song is just it's just so powerful and motivational, and it's awesome. In the Royal Tenenbaums, there's a scene where it's a song called "These Days" by Nico, but it's actually by Jackson Browne, but it's covered by Nico.
I'm going to correct you, Mark.
Oh,
because I
who's it
believe that Jackson Browne wrote it either
yeah,
for Nico, but she recorded
I
it
think you're
first,
right.
and then
She
later he
recorded
decided to go ahead and record his own version of it. So his version came later than hers.
So is that the first version then? The Nico version is the first
I
one?
believe so.
Okay,
If my nerdy,
Okay.
you know,
No, I trust
my
you.
encyclopedic
Yeah.
knowledge of irrelevant rock and roll history notes serves
Yeah.
me right.
Well,
He wrote it, but I
Yeah.
believe she was I think he either wrote it for her,
Uh-huh.
or he wrote it and she recorded it, and then he didn't record it himself later.
interesting.
And Danny,
Well,
feel free to cut all that out, because
Well,
oh, you're good.
no, leave
after
it
an hour
in.
and a half, I'm sure people don't want to hear me lecture on the chronology of the song "These Days" by Jackson Browne.
It's a great scene because it's like he has this he kind of has this crush on her, you know, his adopted sister Margot. It's a weird movie, but anyway, like she's coming, you know, out of this bus, the Green Line bus, and he's sitting there at a bench, and then it's like slow motion. She's just coming in slow motion. You see her hair barely waving, and they play that song, and then they kind of gather in this just soft hug, and it's a really cool scene and a cool song.
Well, and can I say, since we're on this note, and since if anybody's still listening, they're with us. So.
They're committed.
But one of the things I absolutely adore about Wes Anderson's soundtracks is the way that he uses a very specific era of the Rolling Stones catalog. Like, because there's a lot of well-known Rolling Stones songs, and of course their catalog, you know, spans decades upon decades. But what I love is that he has a way of picking out songs from kind of their post-Satisfaction, early kind of rock and roll stuff, but before they kind of turned into the world's greatest rock and roll band and started just doing kind of Exile on Main Street, you know, 1970s. Like there was this avant-garde, really experimental phase where, if you know the band well, Brian Jones was doing a lot of, like, they were using sitars in songs and doing a lot of, it was kind of almost like Baroque type music. And it's like this 1965, 66, 67 stretch. And Wes Anderson picks out, you know, in multiple movies, and the one that he uses in Tenenbaums is She Smiled Sweetly. That's the one that when they decide to lie down and just kind of like have a moment in the tent, and they put the record on Margot's little record player. It's the Between the Buttons album from the Stones, and it's that song that, you know, and I've got that same album, and that was one of my favorite albums, and it just, you know, because it's so weird because it's just not a very well-known stretch for the Stones in terms of those songs. Because usually you think about it in terms of Start Me Up or, you know, Satisfaction or, you know, Jumping Jack Flash and stuff like that. But I love how he kind of just dug into that weird little window of theirs. But yeah, and tangent.
You mentioned Pulp Fiction. That's a great soundtrack. It's another one that I feel like I kind of wore out. Listened to it all the time.
Yeah.
It had a song. I think it's a cover, but you could correct me. By Urge Overkill, called "Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon," which I believe is.
Do
a
you
Neil
want to
Diamond.
know who it's a cover up? Yeah, I was going to say,
Neil
it's a
Diamond.
Neil Diamond song.
And
it is a Neil Diamond song.
Yeah, and it's got "Son of a Preacher Man," and it has "Let's Stay Together."
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And see, and that was one of those ones where I already knew the song, but when I heard it in Pulp Fiction, just, just propelled it to the top. That,
And what's
and,
the other one? It's Count the Flowers on the Wall. That don't bother me at all. I can't remember what
the
that's called.
Statler Brothers.
Statler
Flowers
Brothers.
on the Wall. Yeah. It's,
a lot of cool songs. And see, that was one where I hadn't heard like almost any of those songs when I listened to that soundtrack.
Yeah.
You know, and it was cool. Garden State. You know,
yeah, that was a good
early Coldplay from their first album. It has "Don't Panic" on it, and Andrew Bird. Lots of good stuff from
the Shin.
kind of
The
that
Shin
era.
song, I think, is the one that everybody remembers the best, right?
Oh yeah, when they're both listening to it, Zach Braff and Natalie Portman listen to it on the headphones. Yeah, I think
because isn't that where they point and say they accuse Natalie Portman's character of being the manic pixie dream girl?
Right, I think they do.
Because she's like, oh, you got to listen to this song; it'll change your life.
Yeah, and they have 2 songs by the Shins. I think that Tearing is Creepy and New Slang, I think, are both on there. But that's a cool soundtrack. And then a couple other ones. Last Action Hero. That's a lot about rock.
Really?
A lot of like that 80s.
Oh man, I don't even remember that one. I mean, I remember the movie, but I don't remember the soundtrack at all.
Go and look up the soundtrack. It's really awesome. It's a lot of cool stuff. And then Frida, kind of a curveball choice, but Frida has a lot of cool music that it's probably music you'll never hear anywhere else. Burn It Blue, and some Mexican music that's got some really cool flamenco guitar work, and I like that soundtrack. That's another one I've listened to a ton.
Okay, so now I've got a question for Dani.
Okay.
So, do you have? I mean, how do you feel about Baz Luhrmann soundtracks? Like
Moulin
Romeo
Rouge.
plus Juliet, Moulin Rouge.
Oh, like the jukebox soundtrack kind of stuff, or
Well, just because they're taking popular songs, but then kind of converting them into this musical style.
Yeah, I listened.
That just I don't know. That just strikes me as something that you would find interesting, and so I'm interested to see what you think of that.
I haven't seen Romeo and Juliet one, but Moulin Rouge I listened to often, and that was another one where like I'd only seen parts of it. The Elephant Love medley, I think, is just like one of the most beautiful songs ever. That was my favorite song for a very long time. So yeah, no, I definitely, I really like that one. I'm not familiar off the top of my head of any other ones, but yeah, no, that's definitely something up my alley. Plus, I feel bad, something that would be up my alley. I haven't even said anything about Disney songs. Minus like a slight reference to Coco. And
we could almost do a whole episode on Disney music.
And I mean, like, a lot of it's, like, musical stuff, right? So, like, I mean, yeah. But one that's technically not a musical, and it is my favorite Disney soundtrack, for anyone who is wondering, it's Tarzan. I grew up watching that movie on repeat. My first phrase was more Tarzan, you know? Like, this was a very important... You know, you were talking about foundational stuff. That is as foundational as you can get. But,
Yeah.
Well, if anyone ever asks if you like Phil Collins, do you know what to say? You say, I've got 2 ears and a heart, don't I? That's from 30 Rock. But yeah.
Well, you know what the other response is?
What?
No woman can ever truly love a man who listens to Phil Collins.
I thought that was...
That was from Sing Street.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's true, huh?
That's right. Because when the big brother, when the kid is like, yeah, and then her boyfriend came and drove off, and he was listening to his radio real loud, and what was he listening to? Phil Collins, or he was listening to Genesis. Like, no woman can ever truly. He's like, this is not a problem. This is not a problem. No woman can ever truly love a man who listens to Phil Collins.
That's funny.
Which is funny because I actually do like Genesis, and so you know.
Yeah.
But that's
You feel a little called out on that one, huh?
Here's a
little bit. But
I know this is really long, but I have one quick question. Is Once a musical?
Once, that would be my kind of territory of like Inside Llewyn Davis and that kind of stuff. But like, oh my goodness, like Falling Slowly is one of the best songs ever. Oh,
Because the characters, I mean, they sing the songs, but it's not like random people who are non-singers breaking into songs, right?
Exactly.
It's part of the story.
Exactly. So I mean, it would be
like
something
Sing
that would
Street.
be on my list. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. No, because
I love
because
that one.
the
Oh my
Blues
gosh.
Brothers, you can argue that the Blues Brothers is a musical because they do have characters kind of break out into some weird song and dance. You know,
They kind of do, yeah. like
you know, like
in the diner,
the Aretha Franklin
right?
scene and the Ray Charles Shake a Tail Feather, you know, but no, because that I was thinking that same thing with like Once and with Sing Street, you know, but I think in the case of Once, they are performing songs because they are a band that is recording music, and so even though it has some of that musical feel, I would still classify it as, you know, of course at the same time, I think there's a difference between a soundtrack where the people in the movie are performing the music versus Guardians of the Galaxy, where they're taking popular songs and playing those popular songs on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
But we've probably differentiated between family stuff already, and
We have.
maybe need to
We
wrap this
probably
up.
need to wrap it up. Oh, Brother, Where Art Thou? That's the one other one
Yep.
that
Oh,
I
gosh,
would
yeah.
talk about too.
Yeah.
That's
I wrote a
awesome.
paper on that one in college. I wrote about it was a folklore class, and so I wrote about the soundtrack to "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou." So definitely love that one.
That's fun.
Also,
Yeah.
I was realizing I said that wrong. That when I was talking about my musical tastes, well, not that anyone cares by now, but like I did listen to U2. I did hear U2 and Depeche Mode in my teens, but I got into them even more
I'm
later.
glad you clarified that, Mark, because
But then, like The Cure,
that could have
I'd
been
never
a real.
heard them. I know The Cure is weird because for how good they are, I don't think I'd ever heard them all till I don't at least remember hearing them till like my 20s. Same with the Pixies. You know, like that's another
Yeah,
band
the
that
Pixies for sure.
just was never introduced to me as a teenager. So it's funny how we go through different musical phases based on
Yeah.
you know discovering them at a certain certain
Well,
age.
Right.
and I think that discovery, if we want to wrap it up this way, is just like great way to discover music is through these movies, right? And so, like, you know, it's when you watch these movies, that's when you establish that connection with the songs, right? Like, you know, that's a great way to find the popular hits. I don't know.
Well, and on that note, if anyone who's managed to listen this far and has stuck with us all the way through this, if you are inspired by any of our choices, or if you have any choices to share, please pass them along. We are definitely excited to hear new music and would love to think that some of our choices have maybe expanded your own libraries a little bit. Make comments, drop us emails, have a great time, and hope that your summer is unfolding well. And we'll catch you with our next episode.